So welcome back, tubers. What I ended up getting in the mail was some more of these discharger units. I've got 5 of these already inside the house that I use for discharging, and I really need to get through discharging a lot quicker than I currently am. I'm changing out the cells obviously throughout the day quite a few times. However, 5 of these is just not enough, so I really needed to double that. So this is what I've done. I've ordered 5 more. They come individually like this, with the LCD screen, the heatsink and everything's pretty much set to go. So you just need to plug in 12 volts, connect in your battery, and away it goes. So the best thing that I've done before is mount this to a piece of wood. That way it's nice and sturdy. Because you're pressing and pulling out batteries all the time, it needs to be quite sturdy and also quite simple to use. So what I'll do is, this is obviously, I've got 5 inside the house already on its own board. What I need to do is recreate the whole thing and do another 5. On this piece of wood here, I should be able to fit 7. And what I'll end up doing is putting them a lot closer together than I did before. And so they'll be very much like this. And then what I'll do is I'll have the battery 18650 units, the holders 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 along this side, and obviously that will mean that if I get a couple more of these, which I will because they're cheap enough, I'll put 2 more down here, and that way it'll pretty much fill up this whole piece of wood. The other thing is that I really do love these. They're great units. I'll talk a little bit more about these later on in the video, but the first thing is that let's mount them to the piece of wood and let's put the holders in place. Now before I get into that, however, rather than using plugs and plugging something like one of these, which is kind of out of frame, oh well, this will do. So instead of using this type of plug and then having that plugged in, and then obviously needing to get 5 of these, and kind of the problem with putting the plugs in is that you can't mount them close together. They need to be kind of separated, and this is kind of how I did it on the other units, so that there's always a separation for the plug to be able to plug into the top of them. In this case, I want them to be all nicely in line and quite close to each other. So what I thought about doing was, rather than using a plug to plug into the DC connector on them to give them 12 volts of power, what I thought about doing is, well, flipping them over, and it's really easy to solder onto those contact points for the DC terminal there. So what I thought about doing was just wiring straight onto that, and that way the cable will come under here and then come out on the sides, and that way these can be all butted up against each other, look a lot nicer and cleaner, and I'll be able to fit obviously 7 units per piece of wood without taking up too much space. I had a look in a bunch of boxes that I had, and I found this that I glued to something many years ago, and it contains 6 or 5 red wires, so yellow wires. So that's going to be perfect for me to actually just cut a couple of these cable ties off and actually just snip this, make it tidier, and use this as a terminal block. That way I can plug in have a 12 volt adapter going into here. That'll split it off to each of these individually, and it'll make it look nice and tidy. So I'm not 100% sure how this is going to sit, but the first thing to do is obviously tidy up these cables, flip these all over and solder it to these, so the positive negative will come in on each of these, and it'll make it nice and tidy without using the plugs. And since that I'm always going to use it on a board, just like I've done the last year with my other sets of discharges, I'm never going to really take it off this, and if I do, I can always use the plugs later down the track. So what I'll do is I'll start stripping this off a bit more, and what we'll do is we'll turn on the soldering iron and we'll try and make these up and see if it'll work. I'm hoping that this is going to be long enough to get to all of these units, and I've got a feeling it will do, but look at that, it's enough separation there, so that should be fine. So yeah, this is actually going to be perfect. Good thing about this is that it hasn't cost me anything, and just reusing old stuff that I've had sitting around for years. So let's get straight onto that. So first things first, I've just cut off the wires to make them a lot neater. Next thing I'll do is just put a dot of solder on each of them, and then we'll flip it along. I can see that this end here is the positive, which means that this part here is also the positive, so I'll be connecting the yellow wires to the positive and the other wire to either one of these two. I'll use this one here because it's more separated, and that way less risk of the wires touching. most likely what I'll also do is, once these are soldered on here, I'll just drop a bit of hot glue just to make sure that there's no movement and there's no risk that they'll fall off. So just waiting for the soldering iron to heat up, and then we'll solder these things up. So that's how it kind of looks after a bit of quick soldering. So now what I think I'll do is I will first test it with a multimeter to make sure there's nothing shorting, and I'll also get the hot glue out, because we just love using hot glue, and we'll just hot glue these wires so that they stay flat and there's no movement if there's any movement with the cables. And that way they won't break off and will last a lot longer. So they're just gently tacked on. They're not passing much current at all. It's just a supply at 12 volts to be able to liven them up. So while we wait for the hot glue gun to start up, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this, but this unit, this multimeter doesn't beep when it connects, but what we really want to do is just check that there's no direct connections. And as we see, we've got 0.8 there, so we know that if we do a direct short, we end up with 000. So we know that there's no direct shorts to ground, which is good, because we just want to make sure that when we have done the soldering of the positive, that the rest of this grounding thing here isn't shorted to it, so which isn't the case on any of these. So these are pretty much good to put some hot glue on, tidy them up, and then after that we mount them to the piece of wood. Okay, so now that it's all a little hot glue all over it, next thing to do is, what I've also done is taken the little metal feet off these things here. So I've taken these off so that it'll sit flush against the piece of wood. And with any luck, if we turn these over, there's an extra wire, so I'll pull that out later. And how are we sitting? Kind of feels a bit wound up the wrong way, so how are we going to fix that? It's like these ones need to be at the bottom. Yeah, that goes at the top, that one fits better there. Where does this one fit better? Somewhere along here. So, with any luck, I should be able to drill some holes and put these in the correct spots. So let's try that. Okay, so what I've done, I've got some nice little screws. They're not as thin as I'd like, but they're actually stainless steel, way better than I need for this project. So what I'll do is I'll just pre-drill some holes, and then we'll screw them in. I'll start with the top one, and then we'll go down. So what I'll do is I'll tighten those up later, but let's just try and get them into the right positions first. So I'm just going to try and stick 2 screws in for now, because it doesn't really need much once it's in there, but we'll just start with 2 screws and we'll work our way down. Alright, so now that we've got all the screws in, we've had to loosen that little bit off there, and now we just need to give it a slight bit of tightening. This drill out of the way, just to kind of take just to tidy it up just a little bit. So the key thing is just to make it so it's just tight enough, but not pulling the circuit board down too much. Just so it's kind of sitting in there. Pretty solid with just those 2 screws. So that's all it needs, because all we're doing is just pressing that lower button on the bottom. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. We'll try and tidy this up somehow, so we'll just connect our 12 volt adapter into that. We should probably just give it a quick blow with all that dust around, and then we'll connect our 12 volt adapter up and make sure it actually works before we do our next part. Okay, so what's the easiest way to test that without actually cutting off this? Well, to be honest, it actually just might be to plug it into the top of one of these and just test that this 12 volt 2 amp power supply here will be able to run all 5 of them. So because they're all connected together, all the positives and all the negatives, plugging in the top plug, for example, should liven them all up. So let's just give that a go before we cut the end off this one, and if it doesn't work, it'll be obviously annoying and a bit of a waste. So let's just test it to start with, and I'll just plug this into a power lead. Okay, so we should have 12 volts on this, if not a bit higher, because it's most likely unregulated when it's not under load. Oh, it's actually pretty good, 12.2 volts, so that's good. Okay, so now let's just plug it into the very top and hopefully they don't go bang. Perfect, that's exactly what I like to see. So these are all set by default to be discharging at 1 amp, and that's what I will leave it to, and discharge at 1 amp down to 3 volts. However, you can increase this all the way up to 2.5 amps. So at 2.5 amps, however, you'll need a fan blowing against these, but I think in around 1.5 to 2 amps is absolutely fine. These heat sinks can dissipate enough heat. So yeah, let's move on to the next part. What we'll do is in fact, do we even need to cut that? Possibly not. In fact, let's not even bother cutting this to wire it into there, because, well, I want to get another 2 because I might as well to fit in this space here. So until I do that, we might as well just keep plugging this into the top, since that works perfectly fine, and it's nice and neat and tidy, and it's easy to move around. So yeah, let's not even worry about cutting this and wiring it directly into that block. Yeah, good idea. Okay, so next step really is to pull apart this contraption to separate all these, so then I can put some wires on them and wire them up. Let's do that. Okay, so what I've done is I've just pulled that whole brick of these apart that I actually had glued together just to make a big parallel one, because I didn't buy any of the 4 things all together. So I split them off, and I've got the individual ones back again, and now I've just soldered the positive and negative onto each of these, so just the leads, and I've cut them about the size that I think I need them, so that I can mount them something like that. Next thing I'll do is I'll just screw these wires in, and then I'll screw them on the board. Let's have a look at how that looks. Right, so that's how it's looking. So I've mounted them all there and stuck some screws, one screw in the middle. That's actually all it needs. That way you can just throw your cell in and then pull it back out again. It's not too difficult, especially after it's been done a few times. So yeah, nice and simple, and that should work. Now I'm missing, I was one short of one of these, which is a bit annoying. However, I do have one of these blocks, a block of 4 that I technically could pull apart, I guess. Just cut it through the one side of it, really. Maybe I'll give that a go and see if it turns into a complete disaster or not. Oh yeah, so that might have worked. Not bad there. Now we're down to 3. That's one way I have ordered like 6 more, so I will have lots, but unfortunately they take a couple of weeks to get from China to New Zealand. So it didn't turn out too bad. It's still got some strength in it. The question's going to be whether the cell will go in. Oh yeah, that should be alright. It'll do for now, and if it doesn't work we can always replace it. Well, this top one actually fits in quite nicely. It's not perfect compared to the rest, where they do have a bit of a wall on them. This one's a bit more flimsy, but it's actually, well, it's going to do the job for now until I get the new ones. So I'll replace this one later, but it will definitely do the trick for the next couple of weeks anyway, and then we'll replace it with one of these other ones. But no, that should be good. So I am happy with that, and really the next thing to do is just give it a dust off and take it inside with the next ones and put them side by side. So this is how it's looking now after it's finished, and to be honest, it looks pretty clean. It looks pretty tidy, and I'm quite impressed. So I will get the other two and put them down the bottom there, just like I said in the garage out before, but it's working really well. So I've tried it out with some nice red cells, the best type to use obviously for testing. So yeah, no, it's going really well. It looks a lot prettier than the first design, which is obviously this one here. And yeah, so now testing 10 cells, or discharging 10 cells all at once, and yeah, really impressed and really happy. Now, one thing I did want to mention was the reason I like these discharges so much is they're not too much more than the discharges where you've got to buy the little resistors that I don't really have on hand, but yeah, the little resistors that you buy and connect onto. These are only a few dollars more, and they work fantastically in comparison to those other ones. You don't have to add anything to them, as you've seen. It's already got the heatsink and the MOSFET and the bits and pieces that, or the power resistor or whatever it's using. But yeah, I love these, and for the price, for 5 of them, it's about the same cost as a Opus. Obviously it doesn't charge, but that's why I've got my charging station in the garage, so where I've got, what, 20 chargers there. So for the cost and for what you get, and these just work really well. The other thing I love about them is that it's just so simple to pull the cell out, to put a new one in and double click the button. It's really simple and really easy to use. When I was using the Opus, which I'm not using anymore because I ended up blowing it up, but when I was using that Opus, it was just troublesome pulling the cells out. It just wasn't accurate. I wasn't confident in it. Where these, I've tested with these 5 here, I've had for over a year now, and I've tested 2,000 cells plus on these things now. So yeah, with 10 of them, it's definitely going to improve the production and the testing, but it's just, these things are just fantastic. So yeah, I highly recommend them. I'll put another link down in the description below. I've already spoke about these in other videos, but yeah, they're just really quite cheap. They are a good unit, good quality, and they just work for discharging. And as I said before, you can discharge at 2 amps or 2.5 amps if you like, with other cells, or if you're doing other testing for other reasons. But with Powerwall, we always discharge, or we're doing testing for the Powerwall and things like that, we always discharge at 1 amp, and that keeps a good reading with everyone else's that they're also doing across the internet and on the forums. So everyone uses 1 amp. So obviously this is all tested at 1 amp as well, but you've got the option to discharge at 2 or 2.5 amps as well if you really felt like it. So the key thing though is to always be consistent. So if you use one thing, always stay with the same thing, otherwise the results are going to be all over the place. But the results with these I found are very good, very stable, and it works well. So yeah, once again, happy. So anyway, thought I'd just show you this video on this build of this unit here, and like if you haven't liked already, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks again, guys.